am an elevator technician. It's a straightforward job, mostly quiet. You wouldn't believe how many people take their elevators for granted, like they're just steel boxes gliding up and down as effortlessly as breathing. They're not. Elevators are delicate, sometimes even temperamental machines, and they have their quirks. I'd been in the business long enough to understand that. When my manager called me into his office that Friday evening, his face had that strange look, something between worry and relief. His brow was furrowed, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for the right words. He drummed his fingers nervously on the desk, and his mouth opened and closed a few times before he finally spoke. He explained that there had been an incident in Osaka at a place called Shinrei Tower. I'd never heard of it, but from the stack of paperwork on his desk, I gathered it wasn't just any job. It's an older building, he began, his fingers drumming against the desk in a staccato rhythm. High-rise, maybe 20 floors, but it's different from the usual buildings we service. It's got a history, one that seems to make people uncomfortable. He paused, his eyes clouded with something that looked like unease. We lost someone there, Kenji. You know him? I did. Kenji had been with us for years, the type of guy who could always figure out a tricky circuit or a jammed gear. He was the kind of technician who was meticulous, almost obsessive about getting things right. To think of him vanishing in some rundown building sent a ripple of dread down my spine. My job wasn't usually dangerous. We dealt with machinery, sure, but we followed safety protocols, and everything was systematic. Kenji knew what he was doing. If something had gone wrong, it wasn't because of a simple mistake. What do you mean, lost? I pressed, leaning forward. He swallowed. He went in for a standard maintenance check 2 nights ago. There were complaints about noises, grinding sounds, crying, even footsteps coming from the elevator at night. His voice dropped to a near whisper. He never came back out. A chill swept over me, and the air around me felt thick. It was ridiculous. I'd fixed hundreds of elevators in all sorts of places, but the way he said it, like the building itself had swallowed Kenji, I brushed it off as nerves. All right, I said, forcing a steadiness into my voice. When do you need me there? Tonight, he said, almost apologetically. They're desperate. The residents are refusing to use the elevator, and you know how it goes. People panic. He sighed, rubbing his temples. The property management is putting pressure on us to resolve it quickly. They're losing tenants. People are moving out. There's this atmosphere of fear that's spreading like wildfire. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of Shinrei Tower. The night Osaka's sky was thick with mist, the kind that swirled lazily beneath the dim yellow streetlights, making the world feel both blurred and isolated. The building was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by narrow, sloping streets and small clusters of shops that seemed more closed than open. Osaka was usually lively, even in the late hours, but this part of the city was different. Almost forgotten, it seemed. The air felt colder here, as if the mist itself carried a warning, urging anyone who wandered by to turn back. The lobby of Shinrei Tower was suffocatingly silent, with only the occasional hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The building manager, a stout, elderly man with thin-rimmed glasses, handed me the maintenance key and tried to shuffle off without a word, as if he couldn't wait to be away from me, or maybe from this place. His eyes avoided mine, and I noticed how his hands shook slightly as he handed over the key. He muttered something under his breath, a word I couldn't quite catch, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. "Hey, wait," I called out, taking a step toward him. He paused for a moment, turning halfway, his eyes darting nervously toward the elevator. "What did you say?" I asked, trying to sound casual despite the unease growing inside me. The building manager sighed, his shoulders slumping. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with something that looked like both pity and dread. "It's not safe here at night," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "What do you mean?" I pressed, my curiosity outweighing my fear. There was something about the way he said it that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He hesitated, glancing at the elevator again before speaking. "Your colleague, he was a good man," he said slowly. "But he shouldn't have stayed so late. The tower, it changes at night. Things happen that shouldn't." I frowned, stepping closer, my pulse quickening. "What kind of things?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Look, I just need to know if there's something I should be worried about." The building manager's eyes widened, his lips trembling as he shook his head. "You wouldn't believe me even if I told you," he whispered. He took a shaky breath, then added, almost to himself, "They never do." Without another word, he turned and shuffled away, disappearing through a side door without even glancing back. I stood there for a moment, the words hanging in the air. The tower changes at night. Things happen that shouldn't. I rolled my toolbox across the floor and headed to the elevator, a chill running down my spine. Whatever had happened to Kenji, it was clear the building manager wanted no part in it. And now, neither did I. The elevator doors were stained with rust along their edges, and as I opened the control panel, something slipped out. A worn, handwritten note. My fingers trembled slightly as I unfolded the note, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was written there would change everything. It was a set of instructions labeled Elevator Testing Rules. Kenji's name was scribbled in the corner, barely legible. I frowned, scanning the rules. They were oddly specific, even for a technician's checklist. 1. If the elevator stops at the 4th floor on its own, stay inside. Press the closed door button immediately. Do not step out, no matter what you hear or see. 2. Press the button for floor 12, and when the elevator arrives, stand inside for exactly 10 seconds before moving on. 3. If you notice a woman's reflection behind you in the mirror, do not turn around. 4. Never press the button for floor 13. My hands started to sweat. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this unnerved, yet I couldn't look away. The rule about the woman's reflection made my skin crawl. I stole a glance at the elevator's mirror, a shiver running down my spine. There was no one behind me, thank God. But the possibility lingered in my mind, pressing down like a silent threat. With a sigh, I pocketed the rules and turned my attention back to the elevator. Time to get to work. It was 1:05 a.m. The first sign of trouble appeared. I had started testing the basic functions of the elevator, and things had been relatively normal. Doors opened and closed, buttons lit up, the usual. But as I pressed the button for the 6th floor, the elevator came to a jarring stop at the 4th floor. I hadn't pressed that button. The doors opened, and the lights above flickered. A strange weeping sound came from somewhere beyond the elevator, echoing through the empty hallway. It was faint at first, almost easy to dismiss, but as it continued, the sound grew louder, more insistent, like someone was demanding my attention. I glanced at Kenji's note, my fingers brushing against the paper as I read the first rule. If the elevator stops at the 4th floor on its own, stay inside. Press the closed door button immediately. Do not step out, no matter what you hear or see. The rule seemed ridiculous, but the coincidence of the timing was unsettling. My gut twisted as I hesitated, feeling the urge to step out and look around. But something about the sound kept me rooted. I swallowed hard, the sensation of unease creeping up my spine, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. There was a heaviness to the air, a palpable tension that seemed to thicken with every passing second. "Is someone there?" There was no answer. I could only hear someone weeping, which suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. I felt a compelling urge to get off and investigate, but I hesitated, my eyes scanning the dimly lit hallway. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure, small, hunched over, and standing just beyond the flickering lights. It was a child, but something was seriously wrong. The child stood in a strange, twisted position, its back turned to me. My breath caught as the figure suddenly moved, its head twisting unnaturally to look over its shoulder. My stomach dropped as the child began to move towards the elevator. It crawled like an animal, its movements jerky and wrong, the bones in its front limbs shifting under the skin as they elongated, unnaturally stretching forward. Panic surged through me, and I did as the note instructed. My heart hammered as I pressed the close door button, the lights above flickering faster. The elevator seemed to shudder before beginning its ascent, and I saw the child sprinting towards me, its unnatural limbs propelling it forward with terrifying speed. The door slid shut just in the nick of time, and I heard a loud bang as if the child had bashed against them, the impact making the entire elevator shake violently. I stumbled backward, gasping for breath. "What the hell was that?" I shouted, my voice shaking. My hands were trembling as I clutched the side of the elevator, trying to steady myself. My mind raced, desperate to rationalize what I had just seen. Maybe it was just a neighbor's kid, playing a prank, I told myself, though the words felt hollow. Yeah, just a kid messing around in the corridors, trying to scare me. But deep down, I knew something was horribly wrong. Nothing about that child was normal. Its gaze, its limbs. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. I had made my way to the 12th floor as per the second rule. Press the button for floor 12, and when the elevator arrives, stand inside for exactly 10 seconds. But as soon as the doors opened, a wave of dread washed over me, an instinctual sense that I should leave. I shook my head, muttering to myself. The rules were full of horseshit, I thought. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the button to keep the doors open. My heart pounded as I debated whether to listen to the instructions or trust my own instincts. Finally, despite the gnawing sense of unease, I stepped off the elevator, curious to find out what breaking a rule would bring. The air felt thick, oppressive, almost like stepping into a sealed-off crypt. The dimly lit floor stretched ahead of me, and a sharp, unmistakable stench of rot hit me like a punch to the gut. My nostrils flared, my throat tightening against the assault. I doubled over, coughing violently, each breath a struggle. The smell was overpowering, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I staggered, my eyes watering as I forced myself to look around. The walls, were they moving? It looked like they were pulsing, expanding and contracting, like they were breathing in sync with my own frantic, shallow breaths. My vision blurred, panic clawing at the edges of my consciousness. This place was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. My gut twisted, the instinct to get out almost overwhelming. I stumbled backward, turning on my heel and half running, half stumbling back to the elevator. I slammed the button to go down, my heart pounding in my chest. The elevator doors finally slid shut, and almost immediately, the sense of suffocation lifted. I sucked in a breath, the air feeling clean, normal. The stench was gone, but the fear remained. The elevator finally reached the ground floor with a dull, hollow ding. The door slid open, revealing the dimly lit lobby, and the building manager standing there, waiting, his posture tense yet expectant, like he knew exactly what I'd been through. He watched me step out, his eyes narrowing with a look of weary recognition, as if he'd been expecting me all along. I stumbled forward and leaned against the wall to steady myself, my breathing uneven, mind racing with everything that had just happened. His gaze stayed fixed on me, unwavering, with an air of practiced resignation that only made my skin crawl. "Had enough?" he asked, his voice dry and hollow. There was no curiosity in his tone, just a familiar weariness, almost as if he had witnessed this scene play out too many times to count. I swallowed, barely able to nod, though part of me wanted to scream at him for not trying harder to stop me when he'd had the chance. "What really happened to Kenji?" I forced out, my voice barely a whisper, as if saying the name would summon whatever horrors still lurked above. The manager sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "The same thing that almost happened to you. He thought he could fix it, thought he could outsmart it." His eyes drifted away from me, his face slipping into a mask of tired regret. "But this place, it doesn't want to be fixed. You can try, but it'll always be here, waiting for the next one. Brave or foolish enough to think they're different." His words lingered in the air, heavy and oppressive, but they only fueled the fire inside me. My hands were still shaking, my skin crawling with the residue of whatever I had just escaped, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. I couldn't just let it go. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "These things, they shouldn't be happening. Whatever this is, whatever happened to Kenji, it has to stop." I could hear my own desperation, my conviction rising despite the dread that had taken root in my chest. I felt a swell of anger break through the fear. Maybe he thought he could handle it alone, but no one warned him, not like this. If he'd known, maybe. I trailed off, clenching my fists as the possibilities roared in my head. Maybe he would still be here. The old man exhaled sharply, as if he'd heard it all before. "Look, kid," he said, his eyes hardening as he took a step back. "If you really want to dig around in things you don't understand, then that's your choice. But this is the last time I'm warning you." I watched as he disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone in the lobby. The weight of his words pressed down on me, but I knew I couldn't walk away. With a steadying breath, I stepped back into the elevator, ignoring the weight of the building manager's warning as the doors slid shut behind me. My finger hovered over the panel before pressing a random floor, daring whatever force ruled this place to reveal itself. As the elevator began to move, it suddenly lurched, sending a shudder through the steel frame. I stumbled, catching myself just as a heavy thud sounded from above. My eyes snapped upward. The hatch was slightly ajar, shifted just enough to see a sliver of darkness above. Then, a face, a pale, contorted face of a woman peered through the gap, her eyes wide, unblinking black voids fixed on me. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming at me to look away. Without warning, she let out a high-pitched, soul-piercing scream that rattled the walls. The lights flickered, strobing in erratic bursts, flashing blinding light and drowning darkness in dizzying rhythm. My vision swam, my ears ringing, and just as suddenly, she vanished, leaving only the silence and the dark gap of the hatch, slightly open, like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I gasped, trying to steady myself, clutching at the cold metal of the rail. But when I caught my reflection in the mirror across from me, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. She was there, standing behind me, her face inches from mine. Her cold breath brushed against my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. There was a faint, metallic smell, like rust or blood, that made my stomach turn. Her lips moved in quick, frantic whispers, but the words echoed in my head with impossible clarity. She was reciting the rules, the same rules Kenji had written, whispering each one like a sick lullaby. Her voice was a twisted mockery, the tone half mocking, half sinister. "Why didn't you listen?" she hissed. Good boy Kenji did. He listened. He obeyed. I felt my breath catch as the truth sank in. This wasn't some guiding code. These rules weren't for our safety. They were how she kept her hold over us, a trap disguised as instructions, a leash to keep her victims in line. She had forced Kenji to write them, twisted his obedience into a tool for her control. "No," I shouted, clenching my fists as anger and horror twisted inside me. I could feel her anger closing in around me like a freezing vice, her hollow black eyes blazing with rage as I faced her directly. Her twisted smile twisted into a look of pure fury, her face contorting as she shrieked, "No, you have to follow the rules." I didn't let her words take hold. My hand moved on instinct, reaching for the button marked 13. Her scream climbed to a piercing, unearthly wail, but I forced my finger down on the button. The elevator responded immediately, shuddering violently, and the floor beneath me seemed to drop. I stumbled, catching myself on the control panel, but then felt something warm and slick. Dark blood oozed out from around the buttons, smearing over the panel and my fingers, gluing my hand in place as the thick, sticky substance spread over the controls, covering every number in dark, spreading stains. The thick blood seemed to pulse, almost alive, clutching my hand to the panel as if trying to bind me to the tower itself. The elevator bucked and jerked, the lights flickering in chaotic bursts until finally they blinked out completely, leaving me in pitch black. The only sound was her voice, echoing all around me like 1,000 whispers slipping into my mind. The elevator plummeted, sending me crashing to the floor. The blood covered everything, seeping over the walls and pooling beneath me, the warm stickiness pressing me down, as if the tower itself was pulling me deeper into its grip. I braced myself in the darkness, but finally, a soft ding cut through the silence. The lights flickered back on, and I found myself sprawled across the cold metal floor, disoriented and bruised from the violent descent. I pushed myself up, my entire body trembling, the echo of my heartbeat drowning out everything else. Slowly, I looked up and blinked at the sight before me. The lobby, just beyond the gaping elevator doors. It shouldn't have been possible. The button I pressed was for the 13th floor. My fingers had been steady when I chose it. Yet, here I was, back at the lobby, like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just plunged through the dark, like reality itself had bent. I stepped out, glancing back one last time. The elevator door slid shut, quiet and smooth, as if nothing had happened. The cold, stale air of the building was replaced by the brisk morning breeze as I staggered outside, gasping for breath. I leaned against a streetlight, gulping in the fresh morning air, trying to shake the lingering chill that clung to my skin. The city had started to wake up, unaware of the silent nightmare that lingered within Shinrei Tower. I looked back at the building, its facade calm and unassuming in the early light, as if mocking me. I pulled out my phone, dialing the company as I tried to compose myself. When my manager picked up, his voice held the usual edge of impatience. "What's the status? Did you fix it?" There's something very wrong with that building, I managed, my voice hoarse. It's not the elevator, it's something else. I took a shuddering breath. Shut it down. Permanently. There was silence on the line, followed by a heavy sigh. We need more than that. The company's already invested. Listen, I interrupted, my voice hardening. The building isn't safe. Kenji didn't just vanish. Something took him. I paused, swallowing against the tightness in my throat. I barely got out myself. If you want more technicians to disappear, then by all means, keep it running. After a tense pause, he murmured, I'll talk to the management, see what can be done. I hung up, too exhausted to argue further. I'd said my piece, and now it was up to them. As I turned to leave, something strange pulled at me, a chill crawling up my spine. I looked back, staring up at the windows, squinting into the morning light. That's when I saw her. On the top floor, framed against the faint glow of dawn, a shadow moved, barely visible, but unmistakable. Her face flickered in the window, hollow eyes staring down at me. She was still there, watching, waiting for the next person brave or foolish enough to test the rules.